How do you keep your human population so well under heel?
He has them kill each other. Well, that's what I would do. Humans clearly have the numbers, so fear is essential. And getting them to do it, that is the trick. Ritualization helps. Make it sort of a game. It's all very efficient, really. At least in my experience.
Seems we have similar minds. It has done wonders, tamping down the humans' more rebellious impulses.
UFOs, ghosts, ancient civilizations, the supernatural. We may never know the truth about what's really going on, but it sure is fun to speculate.
This is Factor Theory Live with your host, Stephen Crawford.
Take us into the vortex.
Their agenda is set, I believe, ever since 1954 with the first Nazi SS, Bilderberg meetings, and they set those agendas every year for the 6 corporations that control our perceptions.
Mm-hmm. Well, even through movies and music, they all own the entertainment industry, and I would be referring to the Zionists and some of the people who have also become like your Rockefellers and Rothschilds. It's funny to me that nobody that was voting for these people realized these guys are billionaires. They own all kinds of businesses. Maybe we shouldn't have them. Like, of course, you want a businessman running a company, and we know that's what America is. It became a corporation, unfortunately, and it's just I don't know, man. It boggles my mind, the things that a lot of people will just let slip by. They don't think twice about it. They don't go, hey, wait a minute, now that doesn't sound right. They just go, well, on to the next one. What time's the hockey game start? And well, there's something that's going to break out very soon. Now, apparently in Canada, I'm hearing they're getting ready to shut down the beer and liquor stores. We have to go to a beer and a liquor store to get alcohol. We can't just go to a grocery store or a corner store. When that happens, you're looking at a riot here in Canada. You can have guys running around the streets with hockey sticks, pulling each other's jerseys over their heads and just pounding on each other. Where's your beer? Give me your beer. And it's going to be a fun situation. Do you guys see an end in sight to any of this?
People have been living this kind of illusory life that, we don't know if there's life out there, and the Earth is the only known place on the planet only known place in the universe that we know for certainty has life, which is a bunch of nonsense. But people put their head in the sands, and the scientific community kind of like says, where's the evidence? And the media ignore all the evidence, and so that's the way we've been living for the last 70 years. Well, now I think with this coronavirus, that kind of matrix, that the power of the matrix has been shaken to its core. And as they start to close down all of the the sports and all of the entertainment and all of the restaurants and all of that, and finally the liquor stores and all of that, all of these people are going to be faced with a lot of time on their hands at home, and it's like, what are they going to do? They can't just go to their jobs and blindly do the kind of matrix task that they were assigned.
The program's interrupted.
Start thinking for the first time in their lives, and they're going to start maybe have the time to be able to think. Mm-hmm. Because I know there's a lot of really smart people out there, but they're not able to kind of listen to interviews like this because they don't have the time. They're too busy. Right. Now they're confined at home, and now they finally have time to listen to this kind of material. And I think this is going to be where you actually have an awakening. So I think the coronavirus is a very gentle way, ultimately, of waking up a planet. I mean, you could wake up a planet, we're talking in terms of like, how does the collective consciousness wake up a planet? It could be through a world war. It could be through a cataclysm like a solar flare impacting the planet. It could be some kind of invasion, alien invasion,
right,
or an earth changes. But we're going through this mechanism of a global pandemic, which basically forces people to go home, to spend time with their families, with their children, get to, look at all of this material that they've been ignoring, haven't been able to access because of. So I think in a way, this is something that we collectively, we're going to make a lot of lemonade out of this coronavirus lemon.
We certainly can. It's just a matter of people actually go for it. Dan, you got something to add?
Oh, well, it definitely beats nuking Honolulu and going into a full-on war. Speaking of waking people up, it's interesting on your site exopolitics.org. The whole idea, I've been fascinated with the patents that the Navy's been releasing on fusion reacting and electrogravitics and all these super advanced technology, and all of a sudden I've got the insight that yes, the Chinese have been conducting espionage and grabbed a lot of this technology, and what a clever approach to patent it in the U.S. so that it actually fulfills two things. One, it protects the patents for our government, and at the same time, it helps awaken the public that these type of technologies are something possible.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, those Navy patents are really important. I mean, those are things that people have started to pay a lot of attention to. There's a series of 5 patents that have come out through this inventor, Salvador Payes, and they've all been released. They've all been assigned to the Secretary of the Navy,
right.
And they deal with all sorts of things like a hybrid aerospace underwater craft, a high-energy electromagnetic field generator, a room temperature conductor, a superconductor, room temperature superconductor. So these are some of the patents that Payes has been releasing, and one that really has gotten a lot of attention is his idea of a portable nuclear fusion reactor,
right,
that can generate 1 terawatt of power, and we're talking about a portable kind of device that's maybe a little bit larger than a basketball. That a device like this can be scaled up to be fully portable and to generate 1 terawatt. And when we compare that, the world's largest nuclear reactor is in Japan, and that generates a total. It's like 7 nuclear fission reactors, and that generates a combined output of 8 gigawatts. Well, 1 terawatt is 1,000 gigawatts.
This is a lot of power.
Device.
Yeah.
So this will revolutionize the planet.
Right.
And this is a total change of policy, because for 10 years I've been meeting with scientists and inventors. Many of them received, because of a secret system within the patent office called Sensitive Application Warning System. Anybody that has anti-gravity, free energy, room temperature, all the things that they're releasing out now, they get automatically issued one of these national security orders, which means they cannot share it with the rest of the world. This is a totally indication that the policy has shifted, or the powers that be are guiding it in that direction versus the other direction of complete suppression.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think that's a very important point. Like the secrecy orders that have been issued against, like the total at the moment is about 5,800 secrecy orders have been issued against all of these patents dealing with alternative energy, dealing with kind of new health modalities. And these secrecy orders are issued every year. And basically it keeps all of these patents out of the public arena. and so then you look at all of the classified technologies that companies like Lockheed, Northrop Grumman, General Dynamics, and so forth have been developing for the secret space programs. All of these are highly classified, and Ben Rich said that it would take an act of God to declassify these technologies. So on the one hand, you have the problem of trying to declassify all of these advanced technologies. On the other hand, you've got all of the different national security groups issuing these secrecy orders against these new inventions. So basically, how do you break that? And I think this is how the Navy has decided to break it. They get one of their inventors, because he's a paid employee. Salvador Payés is a full-time employee of the US Navy. He worked for the Naval Air War Center, Aircraft Division, and he basically was, I think, tasked to put out these patents that were marked for publication, because when you actually apply for a patent, you have an option there to not publish. So that if you have some very sensitive technology that you don't want your potential competitors kind of like ripping off, you tick off not publish. So that way the patent gets issued and you're protected, but your potential competitors aren't able to rip it off like the Chinese. Exactly. But in the Payés patents, all 5 of these really innovative applications all were marked. They didn't have the not publish option marked, which meant that the Navy wanted this stuff to be published. They want the public to know that we have things like these Tesla shields that can be built to protect a city from kind of ballistic missiles, nuclear weapons, even coronal mass ejections. Right. I mean, this is one of the inventions, the high energy electromagnetic field generator that can protect a city from a coronal mass ejection.
Well, theoretically, it can protect the planet.
Imagine if we start building that. We're protected. We can't be attacked. The whole MAD doctrine doesn't work, because you can protect a city from nuclear weapons. So this is the kind of stuff that's been withheld for decades. But now through Payés, the Navy wants the public to learn this, and so this, I think, is really important. I think Payés is a very important figure in terms of what is coming our way.
Right.
And while there's technology, we've got Elon Musk. While we've developed anti-gravity, it's been, set back in October of 1954. He's wanting to continue to use the obsolete rocket propulsion technology to work with the U.S. Space Force. What's your thoughts on that, Michael? I know you did a great article on that.
Yeah, well, thanks for raising that, Dan. Yeah, I mean, that was ridiculous. I mean, you have Elon Musk, who's, I think, done great in terms of like being able to optimize this outdated rocket technology and get them to kind of like come up with a rocket that's reusable. But he's trying to sell this idea of reusable rockets to Space Force, trying to say that this is the future, not having a clue that the Air Force and the Navy have developed these incredibly powerful electromagnetic field propulsion systems. And and I kind of in that article on my website that Dan referred to, I kind of like speculate. Well, why is this? Was Space Force and the Air Force, were they just kind of like wanting to kind of like do a lark on Musk, just to kind of like get him to introduce some ideas, or do they have kind of like a role in mind for Musk? Because I think the important thing to keep in mind is that even though when it comes to reusable rockets, Musk is trying to basically promote this outdated technology and optimize it for the future of Space Force. On the other hand, he is an innovator in coming up with the electric car and saying that there's no future for the internal combustion engine and for the fossil fuels, that we need to go electric. So in that sense, he's quite progressive. So I wonder whether Space Force are basically wanting to recruit Trump wanting to recruit Musk, and at some point we'll give him a briefing and say, hey, we've actually developed electromagnetic propulsion systems, and we want you to be the guy to push this out there into the general arena, and we'll help you do it. So the reusable rockets are just one stage, but the next stage is going to be electromagnetic propulsion.
Right. Oh, yeah, we've been scammed from the Nazis going back to Disney and Werner von Braun.
Right.
When Professor Hermann Oberth and von Braun both knew they figured out torsion physics, knew how to do anti-gravity without using rocket propulsion. But, von Braun was going on television back in the 50s and talking about, going to the moon and Mars using rockets propulsion, when they knew very well that they wanted to keep our population technologically at that retarded state while they have this advanced technology that was able to intimidate Truman and Eisenhower into a surrender.
Mm-hmm.
That's totally right. I think that was one of the things that William Tompkins, who worked for the Navy during the Second World War and then worked at different aerospace companies. That was one of the things that he said, was that what was happening, on the one hand you had Werner von Braun and Kurt de Boos and Arthur Rudolph pushing rocket propulsion technologies onto NASA and getting the US military-industrial complex to sink a lot of kind of R&D and funding into rocket propulsion technologies. But on the other hand, sabotaging anything to do with electrogravitics or electromagnetic propulsion systems, that they were sabotaging this all the time and just kind of like making it very, very difficult for the US military to actively start to develop some of these electromagnetic propulsion systems, and just rocket technologies were the only things that the US was allowed to develop, and that's that in the classified programs that has changed, of course, because in the classified Navy and Air Force space programs, they do use electromagnetic propulsion systems and torsion field physics for their spacecraft. But when it comes into the conventional military or for NASA, it's all rocket propulsion.
Right. Grateful President Eisenhower, when he lost control to the infiltrated Nazi corporations, that he set up a plan to with a secret Marine intelligence unit that appears to be activated today because of the threatening of our constitutional republic by these illegal elements that have infiltrated. Not a single person, a CIA director, head of intelligence, president, has been able to gain access to these illegal programs since the time that he lost control.
Mm-hmm. I don't think... sorry, go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, I was just going to just support what Dan said, that these programs have been very successfully covered up. They have kept very senior officials out of the loop, and you see a really good example of that with Admiral Wilson, Thomas Wilson, who in 1997 was given this briefing by Edgar Mitchell and Stephen Greer on on a particular UFO project. And when Wilson made inquiries, he was basically told that he didn't have need-to-know access. And at the time, he was the Deputy Director of the Defense Intelligence Agency and also the Deputy Chief of Intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Right. And he was told you don't have need to know. Later on, we find out, this is after Wilson becomes the Director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, that he found out that this corporation was basically trying to reverse engineer a recovered extraterrestrial craft. But he was again denied access, and he applied to, there's an oversight committee for the special access programs. He applied to this Pentagon committee and saying, well, look, this corporation denied me access. Here I am, Deputy Director of DIA. I should be given access. And this oversight committee in the Pentagon sided with the corporation and said, sorry, you don't have need to know. I mean, just shows you how well all this stuff is covered up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was furious because they threatened him. He would lose rank and he would see an early retirement. Interestingly enough, the NRO classified advisor was from a meeting that I got involved with back in the early 90s. I was recording Bob Lazar for the first time. The base was on lockdown, and they put out this NRO classified advisory that had a distribution list on it, such as Cosmic Ops and Magi Ops. This was a document that Dr. Greer, along with Commander Will Miller and astronaut Edgar Mitchell, handed to the Admiral to look into, and he found out these were actual unacknowledged special access programs that were hidden within layers of secrecy within the secret, special access programs, and that they were controlled by corporations. Mm-hmm. And he was denied access, like Michael is saying.
You know, it's kind of sad, too, to think that there was a private at that time somewhere who knew the information that this guy was trying to get, because he did have a need to know for whatever reason. That's craziness. Now, I wanted to go to Mars next. I've been a proponent of the idea for probably since, we're going back at least 40 years now, that we came here, at least some of us, originally from Mars, that there was some kind of catastrophe, something had happened. I want to even expand on that a little more. A lot of people are worried about Nibiru. I suggest that what if Nibiru is the planet that was destroyed, and that's where we've got our asteroid belt from, so people can take a chill pill and not worry about this Nibiru coming in and smashing into the Earth. But either way, people from that planet even may have migrated to Earth at the same time. So I'm thinking maybe it's Anunnaki as well as Martians wound up coming down here and settling either in the Middle East or at what is now Antarctica, or both for that matter. Do you guys have any theories on that stuff?
Sure, I can add some information about that. I mean, Nibiru, that's a bit of a challenging one, because I think that what probably did exist was a super Earth between the orbit of Mars and Jupiter, and people call it, give it different names. Some called it Maldek, some called it Lucifer, mm-hmm. some called it Tiamat.
Right.
But there was this super Earth, and I think Thomas Van Flandern, he was an astronomer at the Naval Observatory, and he wrote some papers basically proposing this, coming up with this exploded planet hypothesis. And I think that really does support the idea that we did have at some point a super Earth there where the asteroid belt is now, and that at some point, whether it was 1 million years ago, we don't know exactly when, it was destroyed in some kind of cataclysmic event. And that he proposed that Mars was actually a moon of that super Earth and was pushed into its present orbit. And if you look at the geology of Mars, like half of Mars has a different geology. Like the crust is thicker than the other half, which suggests that it was at some point subjected to some kind of enormous planetary bombardment that covered one side of Mars completely and obliterated the civilization that was on Mars at that time. And that's where we get into the whole idea of refugees from Mars, from this super Earth, coming to the Earth. We do know that the CIA did actually recruit one of their top remote viewers, that was Joseph McMoneagle, mm-hmm. to remote view Mars up to 1 million years ago, and he saw the Martians in the last days, as their civilization was crumbling because of some planet-wide catastrophe. He saw the Martians kind of like evacuating, either trying to find safe refuge inside the interior of Mars,
right,
or actually getting on board these arcs. He described them as kind of like metallic planetary arcs and going to some new world or some place of refuge. So that's when you actually had the refugees from Mars coming to Earth, many thousands of years ago. So I think that's probably closer to the truth. I'm not convinced about Nibiru actually existing the way Zecharia Sitchin described it in his books. I know, according to Corey Good and David Wilcock, they say that Sitchin was basically fed disinformation, that he was a deep state asset, and his job was to release part of the truth, but not all of the truth. So I think that he may in fact have been revealing part of the truth, that there was this kind of like colonization from Tiamat, but that rather than Tiamat being destroyed by Nibiru, Tiamat was destroyed by some kind of catastrophic war involving the inhabitants of Mars and the inhabitants of Marduk or Tiamat.
And that would also go to back to the Indian works and the Vedas and all of that as well, right? They actually what they saw was a battle. These aren't just myths that they wrote down, because these things were drawn and written about millennia ago, and they all involved weapons and ships in the sky. Now, wasn't it also found that Mars has something like, was it a 24.9 hour day, and that our body clocks, or at least a bunch of us, are programmed the same way? I'm pretty sure it was Ancient Aliens. I saw that on one of the episodes you were on. But was there someone who did make a discovery, something like that?
I have heard that. I don't know any information about that. Maybe Dan, you've heard that?
Had you heard that at all, Dan?
No. About it is interesting about being fooled over the period of time with I was just thinking about all the different incidences that happened in the 50s with the Space Brothers and all the occupants speaking in High German, or you have one thing was interesting was Billy Myers, who I handled the metal samples when I was working with Dr. Marcel Vogel in the laboratory, analyzing see if it was of this planet or not, which we couldn't determine that it was from this planet. And William Tompkins, both, Billy Myers talking about Simjazi looking exactly like Maria Orsic, and Tompkins' Jessica, the secretary that was feeding him, the Nordic secretary that was feeding him some of these designs and plans, looked exactly like Maria Orsic. And then, you just looking back over the whole thing, and I was looking into George Adamski and going to the Pope and then giving him a medallion and all the different connections with the whole thing. It seemed like a mass charade to fool the population on this planet that these are extraterrestrial and not Nazi craft from Antarctica.
Right. It did seem like there was quite a push to keep it away from the possibility that it could have been these Germans that had discovered this stuff and were down at the other bottom of the world, out of sight from everybody. It makes a lot of sense, doesn't it, that they went down there, they got all of that together so they could start that. They had bigger plans, right? A lot of people were like, well, if they had that stuff, why wouldn't they use it in the war? Well, maybe they had bigger plans, It
was a 1952 CIA document. Walter Beetle Smith, who was also attended the Bilderberg meetings, he was a CIA director. He spoke about, talking about this is psychological warfare. So I think the psychological warfare element has been in place on this whole subject, obviously, for quite some time.
There's a very interesting case that I found very telling, and it was I believe it was in 1957. It involved a master sergeant from the U.S. Army who was stationed near Honolulu in one of the Army barracks there, and he was tasked by Army intelligence to do research on UFOs. So he was doing that. And he says that what happened one evening was that he saw a craft land. He was with multiple witnesses. He saw a craft land in the interior of Honolulu. The interior of Oahu, and that when the occupants came out of the craft, he could see them at a distance. They were all wearing Nazi SS uniforms, and this was in '57. And so he says he kind of like saw all this, and basically wrote up a detailed report. And he wrote up the report for Army intelligence. It was submitted, and then he says that a couple of Air Force officers came along and interviewed him, debriefed him, took the report that he wrote and buried it, and he was instructed by the Army to never talk about it again and reassigned.
And you have to wonder about Betty and Barney Hill, where Barney retracted a statement that on board he saw a, quote, evil-eyed Nazi.
Really? See, I hadn't heard that either.
Michael?
Yeah.
Yes, wow. Yes, definitely. That was his initial report. Talked about these black uniformed, leather jacketed people that looked like Nazis.
Now, were they reptilian at all? Did he describe whether they looked reptilian or not, or were they greys?
No. He described this as a Nazi, as a human. He also described greys. And that's when, as Dan mentioned, he retracted his story because at the time it just sounded ridiculous. How could there be space Nazis?
Right.
So it just sounded ridiculous. So, talking about grey extraterrestrials sounded less ridiculous. So that's he retracted his story, and I think his wife Betty just talked about greys from the beginning, and most of the attention was on her anyway.
Especially because of that star map.
About secrecy because it's so far fetched from what we have been. We've been fed science fiction all of our lives, and even the imagination of science fiction fantasy is pale, or compared to
the reality. Yeah. It's insanity. Well, I asked if it was reptilian because there's this Star Trek show. Star Trek Enterprise, and part of the plot for one of the seasons is they get stuck back in time during World War II, and the Nazis are being helped by
Michael I saw that episode. I think that's actually very accurate.
I did a show about that
there
episode.
Has been these kind of like that the Nazis were being helped by these reptilian-looking extraterrestrials,
and they were building a Hadron Collider.
That's precisely what William Tompkins described. He described how from 41 to 45 he was part of this intelligence program out of Naval Air Station San Diego, where they had these spies embedded within German corporations, and they found out that the Germans were being helped by this group of reptilian extraterrestrials who were helping them basically understand and then reverse engineer all of this advanced flying saucer technology. So it's absolutely correct that yes, the Nazis were helped by reptilians, and that's how they got so far ahead. But on the other hand, there's always a balancing factor at play, and that balancing factor was that the Allies were being helped by the human-looking or Nordic extraterrestrials at the same time, and Tompkins does say, throughout the 50s and 60s, the Nordics were helping the Navy develop their secret space program.
But weren't we just saying that they were actually the Germans, though, the Nordic-looking ones? So was it the Germans being helped by reptilians, and then the Germans pretending to be Nordics and pretending to help us?
Well, there's a bit of history there. The Nordics initially the Nordics helped the Germans,
right?
Because Maria Orsich was a very philosophical, spiritual, Pacific person. She didn't want anything to do with the war effort. She absolutely hated Himmler and his efforts to kind of like weaponize all of the kind of flying saucer technologies and information that she'd gotten from her communications. And it's important to keep in mind that when Maria Orsich began in the early 1920s and began to be helped, that Germany was actually the most progressive democratic place on the planet. You know, the Weimar Republic was very progressive and very democratic. So it made sense that the Nordics thought, you know, because every other nation was controlled by all of these power groups. But in the 1920s, Germany, because of the defeat, was in this unique position where no one really had absolute control. So there was a lot of freedom, a lot of democracy. And so the Nordics were hoping that Orsic would be able to basically push through this kind of like civilian space program. But she was stopped, as was Nikola Tesla in the US. And in the 30s, of course, Hitler came to power and basically institutionalized everything that Orsic and the Thule Society and the Vril Society were doing.
Right.
Oh, Stephen, I want to also mention you're talking about Star Trek coming out. It seems the script about the Nazis and the reptilians actually came through Gene Roddenberry, who was working with Leslie Stevens, who was connected with Office of Naval Intelligence, who his father, Admiral Leslie Stevens, was a contemporary with Admiral Rickle Boda, who was, as Michael is saying, was involved with the Navy spy program. And so this stuff, I believe, was trickled down into seeding these concepts into the public, although it would be many years until the full story is coming out like it is today.
And I mean, isn't that a great way to get all of that information out, but still be able to go, oh, you watch too much TV because
I remember that on Star Trek, yeah.
And they've been doing that for, well, once they started, even with the war effort, they would take missions and turn them into movies. And you'd have Frank Sinatra and John Wayne playing out on the screen what was actually happening that was a top secret classified mission that wasn't told to the public only through these movies, you know. And so that they've had their feet on our throats really from the beginning. They've been able to contain any sort of information. I don't think there's going to be disclosure. A lot of people are going, disclosure's coming soon. I honestly don't believe it's going to come until they find a way to make one of these ships move the way that the secret Space Force does and that the aliens do, but it runs on something that can be metered. When they figure out a way to have a ship that can move that fast around, and it's something that you would pump gas into, or something that can be metered, then they'll tell us about this stuff. So they'll still be keeping secrets. We still won't get that 0-point energy. We're just going to, that's what I believe. I think we're just going to get tidbits. You guys have any ideas?
I think that's a good point, Stephen, because I think one of the things that I found was that in doing the research is that, you know, if you look at someone like Otis Carr, who in the 1950s and early 60s, he built a fully functional flying saucer using off-the-shelf material that he would just go into the hardware store, and he was able to build this stuff, you know, using the information that he'd gotten from Nikola Tesla. So building a spacecraft, you know, with the kind of power propulsion system you need, energy system that you need, or all of that can be done very cheaply. You know, we see people like Otis Carr were able to do it, but I think you're correct that what's going to be revealed is something along the lines of like what we're seeing with the Navy patents. You're going to have like say this nuclear fusion reactor that can generate like a 1 terawatt, which is going to be incredible. But it's going to be companies like Lockheed or General Dynamics or General Electric that builds these things. That you can't go and build one of these things because you know it's too powerful, too dangerous, and you wouldn't be allowed. But you know, if you wanted, if you say your city wanted to invest in one, you could pay X million dollars to say General Dynamics, and it'll build one for you. I think that's the way they're going to go. Similarly with the spacecraft, that they're not going to go down the path where you, the general public, you can get into your backyard with your, you know, inspired inventor friends and build something like Otis Carr did, which is fully capable. You know, you'll be shut down like Carr was shut down. It'll be like, no, it'll be Boeing, it'll be Airbus, it'll be all of these kind of major aerospace companies that build the craft for civilian industry, the flying saucers or the, rectangle, whatever kind of shaped craft you want for space travel that's using electromagnetic propulsion. You have one of these major corporations that builds that for the general public.
Yeah, exactly, because they can't have us doing that. Oh, sorry. No, you go ahead, Dan.
Oh, I was just going to say, Sick and Tesla were both from Croatia, and they were sharing notes. And both the Viral craft and the OTC-1, which Ralph Ring was a pilot in, they used not levers and things like the alien reproduction vehicle, but they actually used consciousness with the intention to fly the craft. Versus probably different than the Hannibal, that the Nazis later developed after the Viral series.
And they do something like that in the movie Black Panther, the Marvel movie. They have them traveling from Wakanda to the States, and this woman's sitting there in a meditation position, and she's controlling the ship with her mind. So this is not new. It's just, and if they're willing to put it out in public now, you have to know that they've had it for decades, and it's already developed, and they're just saying, oh, here's this new idea we have, we're going to start developing it, while they've been playing with it for 30 or 40 years already.
Yeah, well, what Dan said, that's very important to kind of emphasize that, because I know Ralph Ring actually described Otis Carr's OTC-X1, that the navigation and the propulsion system was like this huge crystal that would basically it would be emitting all of these different lights, and it would interact with the pilots, so that you would envisage your destination and you're there.
Exactly.
And I think that's very similar to what Maria Orsic was doing, and that's a very different kind of like type of craft to say what what the Air Force and the Navy have been building, with these major corporations. We have like a lot of these advanced electronics and power systems, very expensive, very difficult to kind of like replicate. That's very different to the kind of technologies that Tesla and Otis Carr and Orsic had put together, and that were designed for the public. That this was never something for kind of like military or corporations to get a monopoly on. It was always presented as something that was relevant to the general public, and maybe that's going to be the next great challenge as we move into this disclosure era, where there is this attempt to like say, there are these incredible electromagnetic propulsion systems and spacecraft and power systems using kind of nuclear fusion, but you have to buy it from General Electric or General Dynamics or Lockheed or so forth, rather than like getting together and in our backyard and putting together some kind of like configuration that can interact with our mind that just transports us there almost by teleportation.
They can't have us knowing how incredibly cheap this information is in this technology, because how can they charge us $1 trillion for their budget if it's something that only costs $10 million? That they need to justify the amount of money they're spending. And if we build these things on our own in our backyard and we do it for say $1,000 instead of $1 million or $1 billion or $1 trillion, there's your Invention Secrecy Act. Boom, get that stuff in place before they find out how cheap and easy it is to actually do this. And you're right, that this is all information that really needs to be pushed. A lot of people these days, like this virus thing, like you said, it's going to be a good thing because a lot of people have the time now to watch shows like this and Ancient Aliens and anything that has to do with technology, and be able to see the possibilities and how long these things actually have been in existence. We're not just talking about theory. My show is called Factor Theory Live. The main reason I have the two of you on here is because you delve into theory, but you deal in facts. Dan has his site, webmatrix.org. Is that what it is, Dan? Thewebmatrix.org?
Webmatrix.net.
.net, sorry. I was thinking org.
Salla. I have been following his material, and I did a lot of my own research, but so much of it is a lot of a lot of his research work is on the cutting edge on all this. Is exopolitics.org that I highly recommend.
Yeah, and you have all your stuff in order.
Books. The Secret Space Program on Amazon is it's mandatory reading to wrap your head around all the details. Michael's done an incredible job on putting all this together, researching these people, going to Freedom of Information Act, verifying witnesses. I have high respect for you, Michael.
Mm-hmm. Well, a lot of people do. We wouldn't be here if it were not for people like you and Stanton Friedman. We wouldn't be here discussing these things today, I don't think. You guys have helped shine a light on a lot of things that needed to be out there. And of course, not just the two of you. There's been all kinds of people, and like Dan said, his site is comprised by a lot of information he has gotten from you, and he's got it all listed in chronological order. So there's a lot of reference points for new people. That's what I was getting at about your site. For people that are new, go to Dan's site, because everything there is in at least as far as anything proven historically that had to do with wars and politics. You've got it there.
I'm only sharing notes online. I did it essentially for my own understanding after I saw what happened at the National Press Club on how the media purposely they did what's called a limited hangout, where they kept the public from aware of these explosive testimonies. I had to, after a media company wanted me an article on media control, I had to start somewhere, and the only way I could wrap my head around is I'm familiar with all the witness testimonies and a lot of documents. I had to put a chronological order in order to see how did we get to where we are today, going back at least to the beginning of the 20th century in the year 1900, which is a good place to start. 1900 was right when Tesla was coming out with stuff, and to present day, and if you look at things chronologically, everything evolves into the next thing, and it gives you a better insight on how this whole thing evolved into what it is.
I think Tesla even, and Michael, I wanted to get your opinion on this. Do you think Tesla could have unintentionally been behind that blast in Russia?
Oh, yeah, that's very interesting. The Tunguska blast in Russia.
I didn't want to say it wrong.
I remember doing research on that, and I remember that at that time, during the Tunguska event, the Earth, Mercury, and Venus were in perfect alignment with one another.
Okay.
And so I think it could well have been some kind of like a coronal blast from the sun, kind of like an electric universe model, where you have like a electrostatic charge coming out from the sun, like a capacitor, how it discharges. So there was some kind of thunderbolt. And so the electric universe guys, they've done great work in describing how this works, where you actually have this coronal discharge, or this kind of electric discharge from suns or from planets when they get into close proximity, and so that was one of the things I did. I looked it up in terms of in NASA website. You have a way in which you can enter in a particular date and see the configuration of the planets, and that was what struck me when I put in the date for the Tunguska event. You see the sun, Mercury, Venus, and the Earth were in a perfect straight line, and so that immediately brought to mind what the electric universe guys were saying, that this was actually an electric discharge that came via the sun through those planets that hit the Earth at that Tunguska area, and what Tesla was doing was something different. With his, I think he was doing, trying to develop his kind of use standing waves to be able to generate an electric energy supply wherever you are on the planet.
Now, given the location of where the blast was, would it be feasible to think that maybe that discharge snuck through an opening at the pole? Because doesn't the magnetic field that protects us, isn't there a slight opening at the bottom and top of those fields, and could it have possibly shot through that way? Do you think that's, or am I just making stuff up here?
Well, that would make sense, because if you look at the Earth's magnetic field, electric charges would flow into the poles.
Right.
So, of course, Siberia is in the northern hemisphere. I don't know what latitude it is, but it's a very high latitude. So it makes perfect sense that if there wasn't a huge electric discharge from the sun, and combined with the Mercury and Venus, that this all led to this enormous discharge that kind of like impacted the Earth. That Siberia, because of the way in which the electromagnetic, the magnetic field of the Earth operates, that would be where this strike would happen.
Right, and that's why it didn't affect the entire Earth. It was just that small area. So we were actually saved by that.
Yeah, at the poles would be the greatest density of magnetic flux density. As you take a magnet, you have your lines of flux going around, and they all combine at the pole. So you have your greatest density at your north and south poles.
That is incredible. Just playing with my screen here. The picture of me turned to you, so I got doubled in up there. Okay, well, you know what, guys? It's been about an hour and a half here, longer than I thought it was going to be. I enjoyed this conversation immensely. Is there anything else you just want to talk about? We have exopolitics.org and the webmatrix.net. Sorry, I got those messed up the first time. Anything you wanted to get into further, Michael?
Sure. I just wanted to say I have a new book coming out. It's called Rise of the Red Dragon. The Origins and Threat of China's Secret Space Programs. It comes out on April 20, so next month, and people can order it from my website, or you can go to Amazon and order the ebook edition now. But yeah, April 20 is when it becomes available, and I want to thank you, Steve, for having me on the show, and I'm really glad to be doing this with Dan, because I see us as collaborators on this, and I love working with you because you definitely understand the big picture, and we're able to kind of connect the dots better when we collaborate with others that are familiar with the material. And
exactly.
And I do love Dan's chronology of all of this from the very beginning, because I think it really does help people who are really wanting to understand how this all began and how it all evolved. And would be great, and one day you should put that all together into a book.
Exactly.
I made a promise to myself. I'm not being a witness. I'm not going to make one penny at this ever, in no way, shape, or form. And it just
you could donate the money.
It's just my own thing.
Yeah, so much knowledge, my friend.
Thank you, Michael.
Thanks a lot, guys. This has been fantastic, and I am Steve Crawford. This is Factor Theory Live with Michael Salla and Dan Willis. You guys have yourselves a great night. Aloha, Michael.
Thank you.
Aloha.
Honored to join all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great night.